Cale! Here's Clark. Who? Who's this guy?
Cale, it must be a happy day for you, huh?
And indeed, it is a happy day. Welcome to the first podcast broadcast of the Cale Clark Show. I'm your host, and I'm joined today in studio by none other than my original producer of the Cale Clark Show at Relevant Radio. Lucas Holt is in the hizzy. Lucas, welcome.
Cale, cheers. I've got my Diet Coke here.
Oh yeah, we gotta crack open the Cale Clark Show tradition. A fresh show, absolutely. All right, let's dial
Yeah,
back
man.
here.
How are you? It's been a while. How are you doing?
It's been a while. I don't know if you heard. There was a little bit of news, which is why we're here right now. So after 4 incredible years at Relevant, and as I said, I uploaded a video in which I said I wouldn't change a nanosecond of my time there. It was the time of my life. It was so great hosting the Faith Explained show and the Cale Clark Show daily for 4 years. It was so much fun. But I was informed that my time at the network would come to an end because of some programming changes, a new show coming in. But I'm so grateful to everybody who worked there, including you. And of course, we worked together for the first couple years of the show. And all my coworkers have a very, very special place in my heart. I want to thank Father Rocky for bringing me into Relevant Radio. It was so transformative for me. But we really wanted to keep the show going, and so many of our listeners wanted to keep it, they want to hang out as well. So we decided we're going to start a podcast and move the show to the net and where people get their podcasts. And this is great. It's going to be so much fun. And I wanted to start it pretty much right away. Lucas, you know how much I love Top Gun. You love Top Gun as well. I was just thinking about this today. Remember when Goose dies? And I don't want to spoil the movie for anyone who hasn't seen it, but when Goose dies, Maverick's kind of a mess, and he's not sure he wants to keep flying. And then Viper and Jester, Viper says to Jester, get him up flying soon. Don't let him wait. Right. Just get him back in the saddle. So we're back in the saddle, and I guess you're my Rio for this episode and all the other ones going forward. So I'm super excited to be doing this with you, Lucas. I'd like to tell people what you've been up to over the past couple of years.
Yeah, well, quite a bit. So I'm happy to say I am now a dad. So that's probably the biggest thing.
Amazing.
My son is now almost 2 years old. So that in and of itself makes for a new adventure every single day. So that's been great. I was teaching for a little while, but now I work for Catholic Charities in the Diocese of Green Bay. So it's good to be in Wisconsin. And I'm super stoked to be doing this podcast with you and seeing where things go. I'm looking forward to it. I know just when we worked together in the past, there were so many great guests that came on and really interesting conversations, and that's what we're going to try and continue to do here. So it should be a lot of fun.
Yes, I hope so. That's the goal. Faith, facts, and fun. We're going to keep that motif going on the podcast as we keep going with Cale Clark Show. So I thought we'd maybe start with a faith-based element. We're going to talk about some other things on this show as well. Tom Brady has some actually kind of interesting advice for those who want to be saints. Not that he intended it to be about that, but a really interesting clip from him that we're going to play later. And hopefully a really, I think, helpful piece for those of you who are in the working world or studying. How do we get focused in a world of distraction? Well, we have to watch out for something called attention residue. We can't, I'll explain what that is in a little bit. But I want to start with this, Lucas, because over this past week at Mass, the gospel readings have been from the Gospel of Matthew, specifically the Sermon on the Mount. And on the Faith Explained show that I hosted on Relevant Radio. And by the way, the Faith Explained, as far as I know, they're still planning on airing past episodes of that, 12:30 Central on Relevant Radio, for at least the foreseeable future. I don't know exactly how long it's going to last for. But we did a number of Bible studies. We did a number of books of the Bible. And I always wanted to do a series on the Sermon on the Mount, just because I just love it. It's just such a great manifesto of Jesus' teaching. And the readings, the gospel readings of Mass for these past few days have been from the Sermon on the Mount. So I thought I'd just share with that. And feel free to jump in, Lucas, if you want to
Yeah.
comment
Yeah.
on any of this stuff as well.
Or can I ask you a
But
question right off the bat?
sure, absolutely.
So it's often referred to as the Sermon on the Mount, but isn't it in Luke's gospel, Jesus is in a plain, like a field
Yeah.
kind of? So is that a contradiction, or what's going on with that? Is it just different artistic, kind of just them
License.
focusing on a certain element of it? Or yeah.
That's actually a great question. I was actually thinking about talking about that whole angle. That could be a show in itself, really. But I just want to say a couple of brief things about that. Yeah, in Luke's gospel, there's something called, it's been dubbed the Sermon on the Plain because he gives what appears to be a truncated version of the Sermon on the Mount on a flat, level place. And so some people think that, well, Luke is sort of compressing Matthew. Maybe he knows of this. I don't think that's the case because it seems like all the evidence is that Matthew and Luke wrote independently of each other.
Okay.
But here's what I think is really going on. I'll just cut to the chase on this. Basically, I think that Jesus was preaching the same basic message everywhere he went, the message of the kingdom of God. And so what he was doing was, depending on how much time he had, if people are there listening to him for the whole day, which very often happened, of course, they would be spellbound by his words. Of course, the divine Son of God, the God-man, of course, he's going to be a great preacher. He's got the word of life. People are hanging on his every word, and they're following him for long periods of time. They're getting hungry. He has to do feeding miracles to keep them alive. So, but there are other times when maybe he doesn't have that much time. So the same basic message could be shortened into an elevator pitch, really, or something like that. And then it can also be expanded into something like what we have in Matthew 5-7 with the Sermon on the Mount. But I think that what's going on here is that probably my current view is that it might have been two separate occasions where he's preaching something very similar. He's not going to change the message as he's going through the synagogues and towns in Galilee. For the most part, he's just going to, like I say, expand where he can, contract when he doesn't have time. That's kind of the working theory.
Yeah.
And that's really what the Gospels are all about as well. That people talk a lot about the differences in the Gospels. Why are there differences? There appear to be little contradictions there. Again, part of that is due to what's called compression. And the evangelists had the ability to expand, contract the message, but they weren't allowed to change it. There's a method of teaching. It's known as the portray, and it means a helpful story. And this was known among the Greeks, but it's kind of the Gospels are really Greco-Roman biographies. They're biographies that fit very well in the first century world. This is how the ancients did biographies in the first century. It's different from the kinds of biographies that you'd read today. Like if you're reading the new Elon Musk biography by Walter Isaacson, it's going to be a little bit of a different style than first century Greco-Roman biography, but that's what the Gospels are. You can move events around in time. You could, as they recall events and speeches of Jesus, they're allowed to sort of elaborate on his teaching a little bit, but they can't, again, you're not allowed to invent stuff. You can't create things, put words in your rabbi's mouth that you're just making up, invent things out of whole cloth. That's verboten. But you're not a parrot either. And in fact, if you were a parrot of your rabbi, you're just repeating, like you have, your iPhone and you're simply recording him as he's speaking, then you play it back, that you'd be considered a bad student. You'd get an F on your rabbinical papers because you haven't internalized the teaching. You haven't fully understood the teaching if you can't sort of repeat it in that way. So does that make any kind of sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense actually. And I never really thought about it before, but it makes a lot of sense. Like with Jesus, it's not like he just gave one message of that he gave on the Sermon on the Mount for the whole 3 years of his ministry, and then never spoke on it again. It was probably something that he was saying everywhere he went, because obviously it's timeless and obviously it's still applicable today. So no, thank you for clarifying that, because I'd always kind of wondered about that, and it always kind of bothered me, and that's great. And just like the whole idea of how we write today wasn't the same way that they wrote back then. So to kind of project back onto that time period and using our own standards. Yeah, I guess I've never thought about that. So thank you, I guess, for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, and it's good to have the,
Yeah.
this reminds me a lot of conversations that we used to have on the air, and we still are on the air, of course. And no, I think it's really really important and crucial that we know that, like what the Gospels really are, what they're all about, why are there differences to the Gospels, and I do want to talk more about that in future episodes for sure. And another thing that we could talk about is why Mark was the first gospel written. A lot of people are kind of bamboozled by that one as well. They think, well, hang on here. Why is Matthew first in the canon? Like when you open up your New Testament, Matthew is the first book that's there, but you're saying Mark was the first gospel. Well, I think one of the reasons why Matthew comes first in the New Testament is because it's a great bridge between the Old and the New. It's a great bridge between the Old and the New because it's a very Jewish gospel. It's very much Jesus as Messiah fulfilling the hopes of Israel. So it's really it's in a great position there. Not that Matthew isn't applicable to Gentiles as well. In fact, at the end of Matthew's Gospel, chapter 28, of course, we have the Great Commission: go to all nations, teach all nations, everything as I've taught you. And the nations, of course, are the Gentiles, the ethne, the different groups of the world. But of course, in the first century, there were, and people don't know this, there were tons of Jewish converts to Catholicism. Tons. Thousands of people believed in Jesus as the Messiah. Jesus' trial in which he's rejected was a kangaroo court, convened at night. It was actually an illegal trial, according to the rules of the Sanhedrin, the ruling council. In the movies about Jesus, in TV shows about Jesus, there's always like a huge crowd of people, as Pilate condemns Jesus to, it probably wasn't that many people there because not a lot of people would have even known this was happening. So we're talking the high priest, his cronies, a bunch of people that were in cahoots with them, far from the entire population of Jerusalem rejecting Jesus, although of course many probably did turn on him. But I really do think that Matthew is structured to present Jesus as a new Moses, and this is not original to me by any stretch of the imagination. So many scholars, like my own professor, Dr. Craig Evans' incredible commentary on Matthew, he has stressed that point. There are 5 major teaching blocks of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, which really correspond to the Pentateuch, right? The 5 books of Moses. But nowhere is that more clear than the Sermon on the Mount, right? Because what does Jesus do? He goes up on a mountain, and of course it could be a large hill when you go to the Holy Land. The Mount of Beatitudes is just basically a big hill, if that's the place where it actually happened. But he goes up a mountain, and he sits down, and he teaches. He brings forth the new law. This is obviously meant to evoke Moses, who goes up Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus, and he comes down with the 10 Commandments. He comes down with the old law, if you will, which is still valid, by the way, for Catholics. But having said that, the Moses typology is absolutely all over the place. That even starts at the infancy narrative, because the infant Jesus has an attempt on his life, just like Moses. Pharaoh tried to kill Moses when he was an infant. Herod the Great, or Herod the Not So Great, he was a pretty bad dude, tried to kill Jesus. And by the way, we've talked about this before too, Lucas. Dr. Craig Evans used to say he's shocked that nobody's tried to make a movie about the life of Herod the Great yet. It's maybe somebody will, but it's really got everything. He was a bit of a swashbuckling character, Herod, when he was younger. There's romance, there's palace intrigue, there's murder. I mean, it's wild stuff made for Hollywood. But of course, Herod the Great tried to slaughter Jesus. He winds up killing all these children in the vicinity of Bethlehem. That obviously evokes Pharaoh's attempt to try to kill all the Hebrew male babies in Exodus chapter 1 and 2. And we did a whole series on Exodus on the Faith Explained as well. I really, really enjoyed doing that book. But again, Moses flees from Pharaoh when he's older, he kills a guy, then he has to flee to Egypt for safety. And that's exactly what happens with Jesus, with the Holy Family. They have to flee into Egypt for safety. And then, just as Moses returns from the desert to Egypt, Jesus, of course, comes out of Egypt. Out of Egypt I've called my son, and back into the Holy Land. And just as Moses delivered the Israelites from bondage to Pharaoh, all kinds of miracles took place. Jesus delivers us from a far greater foe, of course, a far greater evil, Satan. And really, Pharaoh is kind of a type of Satan, also employing great signs and miracles. In fact, the miracles in John's gospel, we're talking about Matthew now, but John's gospel, the miracles are actually called signs. And I mean, it just goes on and on. Jesus fasts for 40 days and nights before teaching this new law of God on the mountain. And that's exactly what Moses did, by the way, as well. If you look at Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 9. But I want to really just pick up on this idea of the 10 Commandments. Moses comes down the mountain with the 10 Commandments, and Jesus comes down with the 10 Beatitudes. And this is where a lot of Catholics say, hold up, Cale. Don't you know that there are 8 Beatitudes? Did you not study any catechism? And we're told this, it's true, 8 Beatitudes, but in actuality, there are 10 Beatitudes. It's just that I think the traditional numbering system is a little bit off, but it is 10, and it makes sense because if Jesus is a new Moses, 10 Commandments, 10 Beatitudes, the typology is pretty obvious there, but I'll show you exactly where that is. And Lucas, anybody else who's listening or watching, if you're watching on video, if you want to grab your Bible, open up to Matthew chapter 5. I'm just going to look at the last Beatitude, the so-called 8th Beatitude. I'm just going to read it and what follows, and you'll see that there's actually 10. So here's the traditional 8th Beatitude. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So that's traditionally the 8th. It goes on to say this in the text. Blessed are you, the next sentence, blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. So that's traditionally the 8th Beatitude. But then if you look at the next few sentences, then it says, blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. That is essentially a 9th Beatitude because it starts off with, blessed are you when men revile you. And then it says this, rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so men persecuted the prophets who were before you. That's the 10th Beatitude. Now, you say, hang on here, it doesn't say blessed. How can it be a Beatitude? Well, the word blessed in Greek, in the Greek text of Matthew's gospel, and kind of sidebar here, some people think there's, and I think there's really good evidence for this, that there's actually a Hebrew copy, an original Hebrew copy of Matthew as well. There's Hebrew Matthew and there's Greek Matthew, which is in the New Testament, translated into English and all the other languages of the world from Greek. Anyways, the Greek version, blessed, the word makarios in Greek is the word blessed. Blessed are you. The word beatitude comes from the Latin term beatus, which also means blessed or happy. Obviously, there was a Latin translation eventually of the Bible. So, but we're rejoice and be glad. It kind of means the same thing because beatitude means blessed or happy. So rejoice, be glad. It's kind of the same thing. So that is the 10th Beatitude. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. So we do really have 10 Beatitudes. This is the 8th, and what follows is really a 9th and a 10th. But people, it's hiding in plain sight. So I think that is very, very key. And that to me, I remember when Dr. Craig Evans was teaching us about this course I took on Matthew with him. I thought it just kind of jumped out at me as well. So there's 5 major teaching sections in Matthew. There's Sermon on the Mount in chapters 5 through 7. The missionary discourse, as it's known, in chapter 10. He sends out missionaries. The community discourse, chapter 18. How do you deal with problems in the church? What if your brother sins? What are you supposed to do? And then, of course, there's the eschatological discourse, which is a fancy word to talk, meaning about the end times, the end of the world. And in Matthew, it kind of has this double meaning of the destruction of the temple, which took place in 70 AD. The temple was a miniature model of the universe to the Jews. So it really was like the end of the world, the end of the universe. But then there's, of course, the future end of the space-time universe, the new heavens and the new earth. So those are the 5 kind of books of Jesus, if you will, within Matthew's gospel. So there's a lot of other similarities as well, which we could get into, but I think we've said enough. So I'd throw that out there. Love Matthew, love Sermon on the Mount, and it was awesome to get that out there in the mass readings this week. And so one of the things that we came across this week, and Lucas, you alerted me to this, and I'd seen this before as well. Tom Brady's been in the news a lot of late. Of course, there was the famous roast of Tom Brady on Netflix, which is definitely not for kids. And he later expressed regret that he did that because his kids, saw that and saw some of the humor, which was pretty uncensored. Let's put it that way. But another big ceremony happened with Brady, Gillette Stadium, of course, when the New England Patriots play in Foxborough, Massachusetts, where he spent so many years as quarterback of the Patriots, was packed to the gills recently because the Patriots inducted Tom Brady into their team Hall of Fame and also retired his number 12, TB12. And there's kind of a viral clip from a speech that Brady made at that event that we found really interesting. And Lucas, if you want to play that clip for everybody, that would be great.
To be successful at anything, the truth is you don't have to be special. You just have to be what most people aren't. Consistent, determined, and willing to work for it. No shortcuts. If you look at all my teammates here tonight, it would be impossible to find better examples of men who embody that work ethic, integrity, purpose, determination, and discipline that it takes to be a champion in.
Yeah, as a great clip, and there's actually a longer version of this out there. It's about a minute or so, maybe 2 minutes long. And he started off by talking about when you're a kid. He said every kid should play football, and I'm not sure I would actually do that. I don't have any sons, but I have to say, because of what we know now about CTE, of course, League of Denial, all that sort of stuff, I have to say,
So
if I had a
it's funny,
son, as much as
It's funny, Cale, because my wife and I are having this discussion right now. Like, obviously, our son's only 2, but like, it's been a question. Like, do we let him play football? Do we not? And we have not concluded on that yet. But my brother is a high school football coach, and obviously, it's a fun sport. But
yeah, he's already got designs on recruiting young Joseph. So
right, yeah. But listening to Brady's speech, I'm like, you know what? Maybe he should play. maybe it would be really good for him to learn discipline and the virtues and everything. So I don't know.
yeah, that's kind of what. And the other clips that we didn't have included here. He talked about how it's actually really good for kids to have to experience things like, Tom Brady talked about when he grew up, of course, he grew up in San Mateo, California. When he was playing youth football, he'd have to get up really, really early. All of his friends are sleeping in and eating pancakes, he said, and he's going to football practice, dragging his heavy gear bag. And then, of course, they're doing 2-a-day practices in the hot sun. He's getting, hit by kids that are way bigger than him physically. It's a slog. You come home, you're battered, you're bruised, and then you have to get up again the next day and do it all over again, just for the chance to play. And he said it really builds toughness and character, and there are certainly incredible lessons to learn on that front too. Teamwork, what you can achieve collectively as a whole is so much more than you can individually. You need your teammates to win in football. But Lucas, I know you thought there's a specific application of this that we could talk about with what Brady said.
Yeah, well, so like I'm watching this, and it's obviously like inspiring and stuff, and well, I couldn't help but think when I was listening to Brady talk, especially that clip that we played, when he said, you don't need to be anybody special. You just have to be willing to do what most people aren't, which is be consistent, show up, and put in the work that it takes. And I was thinking about that in relation to our faith. I think a lot of times as Catholics, as Christians, we think, well, I don't necessarily have the same gifts that Saint Joseph of Cupertino had in like levitation or Padre Pio and bilocation or whatever. But it's like, you don't have to be, quote unquote, somebody special. You just have to be a saint. You just have to be doing what most people aren't, which is being consistent, showing up and putting in the work. And obviously it's by God's grace that we become saints, but we have the responsibility to cooperate with that, and the more we cooperate with it, the holier we're going to become. And I mean, I'll be honest with myself, like I find myself, and I used to be an athlete, I used to be I ran cross country in college, and used to that life where you're just grinding day in and day out. And like there are a lot of times in my faith where I fail to see it that way, and I'm just like, you think you can just kind of get by, but we have to put in the work, just like an athlete has to put in the work in order to improve. And are we willing to do that? Are we willing to do that? All the while, obviously, relying again on God's grace, because it's He who worked in us to make us who we were meant to be. But yeah, so that was just kind of my thoughts when I was reflecting on that. And I found it inspiring, because I'm like, yeah, I need to get my act together. Like, I need to be willing to put in the work and pray more. And I don't know if you kind of got any impressions from that either, but and I had to say this too. I had to say this. Okay, I'm not necessarily a Tom Brady fan.
You're a Dolphins guy, right?
Because, yeah, especially because he owns the Dolphins for like 10 years. And as a Dolphins fan,
the Bills,
I don't
and
like
the
Patriots. Yeah, right. But that I thought that was a really inspiring speech. So it was good. It was good.
Oh, it totally was. And I think that's a great analogy that you drew there with the life of faith. And Brady is Catholic. I don't think he's practicing right now, but I don't want to make a judgment, but I hope he does come back to a full practice of the faith. But having said that, yeah, Tom Brady's a huge inspiration. He had to overcome so much. There's a book that I'd love to interview the author of this book sometime. His name is Jeff Benedict, and he wrote a book called The Dynasty, and it's all about the New England Patriots dynasty. But it's written in a way that I've never seen a book written like this. It's more than just a sports book. It's a book about business. It's a book about people, relationships, achievement. He really focused on that, if you will, trinity of characters that made the Patriots the most successful sports franchise of modern times. It's incredible what they achieved in the salary cap era of the NFL: 6 championships in 18 years, 10 Super Bowls. But the owner, Robert Kraft, that was the most interesting part of the book for me, is this section on Robert Kraft and how he got control of the Patriots. That could be a movie in and of itself. And then Brady, of course, and Coach Bill Belichick. But so many interesting things about Brady's life. And I think these are things that I knew before, but when Brady was growing up in California, he had to win the starting quarterback job at San Mateo High School. He grew up in the San Francisco area, essentially. He and his parents actually had season tickets to the 49ers, and he was in the front row when Dwight Clark made the catch in 1981. Famous catch from Joe Montana in the NFC Championship game against the Cowboys. And it really kind of unseated the Cowboys as the dominant team in the NFC. And that was the year the 49ers won their first Super Bowl with Joe Montana. They would go on to win a total of 4 with him and one with Steve Young. And Tom Brady always idolized Montana and Young growing up as a kid. And he was really upset when the 49ers could have drafted him and they passed over him. When Brady came into the NFL, of course, Brady fell to pick number 199 in the draft. There were 6 quarterbacks taken ahead of him. But even before that, when he went to Michigan, he had the opportunity to stay in state, go to Cal. He could have started pretty much right away. His father, definitely Tom Sr., wanted him to stay local so he could drive and very easily see the games on Saturday. Tom could come home and do laundry on the weekends, that kind of thing. He has 3 sisters. He was really close with them, and his mother, Galen, of course. But Tom eventually chose to go to Michigan. And part of why he did that was, California kid plays in the cold in Michigan, but he knew that he needed to grow up. This is all in the book, and he knew that he needed to mature. He knew he needed to kind of go out on his own. He had lived a pretty comfortable life, in his words, at that point. And there's really no growth without adversity. That's something that we don't like it when these adverse times affect us. But whether it's the loss of a job or the loss of a relationship or the diagnosis, whatever it may be, but there can be a lot of inner spiritual growth there. And anyways, Brady goes to Michigan, and you probably know the story, Lucas, that he was 6th on the depth chart at quarterback in Michigan. Can you believe that? The future GOAT.
I actually didn't know that.
yeah, and he was actually getting depressed because he wasn't getting any playing time. There were all kinds of guys, and he eventually worked his way up. But he had this very important, really providential, I guess you could say, meeting with a psychologist, a sports psychologist, a mentor that his name is Greg something, Dr. Greg. I can't remember his last name, but he's still friends with Brady to this day. And Brady was really kind of beaten down at this point. Like Michigan had brought in this all-star recruit named Drew Henson, and everybody was talking about this kid. And there was a lot of pressure on the coach to play Drew Henson instead of Tom Brady, even though Tom Brady's teammates wanted him to be the quarterback for the most part. Tom played better than him. By this point, Tom had worked his way up to a starting job, but Coach Lloyd Carr went with this all-star recruit named Drew Henson. There's a moment in Brady's career at Michigan when the players are going into the stadium for this autograph session where fans could, meet them and stuff like that. And there was like a lineup pretty much as long as the field for people to get Drew Henson's autograph. And like no one wanted Tom Brady's autograph. Can you imagine? Because anyways, at one point, and I might be getting the timeline, and I might be getting the timeline wrong a little bit, but at one point he goes to see this psychologist, mentor, counselor guy named Greg. And he's explaining like, hey, I'm not getting any playing time in practices. I'm getting like 1 rep, 2 reps. He's like, well, make that your Super Bowl, essentially. Like, do those reps to the best of your ability. That is your game, if you will. Like, make the most of that opportunity. Like, don't waste that. And he's like, that's a great approach. And so he just started, preparing for those 2 or 3 reps he was going to get in practice. As if it were the Super Bowl, as if it were the Rose Bowl. And eventually, he was able to work his way up. And of course, he became what he did. Eventually had some success in college, beat Alabama in the Orange Bowl in his last college game, led an incredible comeback. But then a lot of scouts just didn't get it. They didn't see the intangibles, the leadership. And, he wasn't a physical specimen at that point. There was a famous video of him, looking like, basically like me, like the way my body looks now, like at the draft with the shirt off, slow 40 time. It was just kind of embarrassing. But it's incredible. Like he's really a testament to hard work, determination, exactly what he was talking about in that clip. And, there's another time when he said, and this really struck me as well. And I thought about it a lot when I was at Relevant Radio and I was doing like 2 shows a day every day. And basically in this business, like as you know, Lucas, you have to start fresh from zero every day. Like there's people, once the show's over, right? And they can live on in the archives and things like that for sure. But Tom Brady used to say like, my teammates don't care that I've won 7 Super Bowls. They don't care. Like they need me to do it now. Like, in this game, in this practice, I have to come through for them now. Just like it doesn't really matter where they went to college, if they went to Michigan, if they went to Alabama, or if they went to, Florida or another football powerhouse. It doesn't really matter. Now that they're a Patriot, and he said this when he was a New England Patriot, they're a Patriot now, and they need to do it now here. And so it's I think there's a lot of analogies to draw between what he was talking about and the spiritual life. Showing up. Just getting people to show up for mass is a struggle, right, in this culture.
Right.
Showing up is 98% of the battle. Just get there and get in a position where God can work on you and shape you and mold you. That is absolutely crucial. And just, working hard. And yeah, it is a partnership with God. God is definitely the major partner, if you want to look at it as a law firm, Salino and Barnes, whatever. Like there's a major partner, there's a minor partner, and God is definitely the major partner, but we do have to cooperate with his grace. And that's something that we know as Catholics.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I'm thinking back to when I was a runner, and like honestly, the hardest part was always getting out of bed. It's like once you actually make it out of bed, and I'm finding that to be the case now. I try and wake up pretty early so that I can have time to pray and stuff for our son wakes up because he gets up really early. And I know if I try and wait till the end of the day, it's just not going to happen. But it's honestly, the hardest part is just that rolling out of bed, actually physically getting up once you're up, it's like, it's good. You can put the coffee on, you got your
Yeah.
Bible, you kind of get settled in, but like, it's just so many times I've just put my head back down and then fallen asleep and woken up like 30 minutes later in a scramble because I'm like, well, and it's like,
Yeah.
it's just taking that step, and then once you put that foot forward, God will do the rest. I think, he will begin to work in you in ways that maybe you never thought of before. But so I hope Brady comes back to practice his faith, because I feel like he would be an amazing.
Yeah.
I feel like he would just be an amazing speaker from a faith perspective, to be able to draw on his experience as an athlete. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe he'll come out of retirement and play for the Dolphins. I mean, who knows? I don't think they've actually signed Tua yet. I know. They're dragging their feet on Tua. I'm like, come on, guys, let's go.
Yeah, no, it's true. But Brady almost did play for the Dolphins. There was some, I guess you could say, illegal tampering going on when Brian Flores was the coach. So he walked onto the owner's yacht, and there was Brady sitting there. This was before he went to the Bucks. But anyways, I think your dream of having Brady play for the Dolphins may never happen. But Tua's pretty good.
Well, I mean, Josh Allen is, in my opinion, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and he owns the Dolphins right now. So I don't think the Dolphins would beat the Bills in like 2 years.
We have the same problem with the Chiefs. That's it. So but no, I think it's back to Brady's analogy there. I think this idea that when he says you're not special, all of us are special, of course, to God. We're all unique, but every single one of us can and should become a saint. That's hard for people to wrap their minds around, but we can really become Hall of Famers. We can become saints. We ought to become saints. That's our destiny because of our baptism. And it is possible. St. Josemaria Escrivá, the founder of Opus Dei, he once said, I will become a saint. And he did. But and people read his words, and sometimes they're taken out of context because they say, wow, how arrogant could this guy be saying, I will become a saint? But they don't read it in context. When he wrote those words, if you read on, he says, but it's because I believe in God's grace. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's because he's going to make me a saint. He wants to do it. This is God, and you have to want to do it as well. And that's the ultimate question. Do we really want to become saints? We know God wants us to become saints, but do we really want to? How bad do we want it? Are we going to pay the price? Just like Brady paid the price to be who he became. And
that's a really good. So I like that a lot. I like that a lot from St. Josemaria. It's like, because he has such a firm faith in God's grace. That's why I'm going to be a saint. I mean, that's how it happens, right? I mean, guys. I can't remember what scripture verse it is. I think, doesn't St. Paul say something like, it is he who works in you to work for, you know what I'm talking about? I think it's like in Philippians, maybe.
Yeah, and he says, elsewhere, it's not I, but Christ working through me. It is you, of course, but, giving him permission to do that. We are making choices, but just partnering with God and allowing him allowing his will to work, is so crucial. It's so crucial. And so there's a lot of wisdom there. And that's what we try to do on the show. We've always tried to kind of take, I guess you could say, a Venn diagram. Things are going on in the culture, things are going on in the faith. I'm trying to make two circles here. That's pretty lame. But anyways, you know what I mean? Like that shaded area, in the Venn diagram, that's where the magic really happens. And I was watching an interview with Terry Seinfeld recently, and that's what made his comedy so great. I mean, the fact that, it's a show allegedly about nothing, but it's, you'll take ordinary everyday events and find the humor in them. Well, we have to take ordinary everyday events and find God in the middle of them, in the middle of seemingly mundane life, and find that divine spark, which is there because God is always with us, and he's always wanting us to reach out for him wherever we may be. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah. I love that. I think there's a Jesuit saying, finding God in all things, even in those things that seem completely pointless. God can be speaking to you through that. Which
Yeah, I mean, like a line from a movie, you know, it could be anything. It could be anything. And yeah, I love that. Absolutely love that. So this is something we've never done before, Lucas. This is the first time we've ever done a video episode, an episode with a video element. I'm excited to do it, and
maybe
we like we're learning in public. We're gonna fail in public. We're gonna do this together. Actually, that was part of our plan, folks. We wanted to have the first episode start off really, really low bar so that you can only be impressed going forward.
This is true. That's a great point. And the humiliation that will come as a result, I will offer up as penance for all those who are listening, so that we are all growing in holiness together.
Absolutely. You know, it's true. Like there's no humility without humiliation. That's something, you know, I experience a lot, and certainly during these times. But I really am really so excited that we're able to continue the Cale Clark Show as a podcast. And Lucas, I think we should put a wrap on it right now. We'll talk about that other stuff in the next episode. But I think we don't have any sponsors as of yet, so there are no sponsor breaks. This is about the length of maybe even longer than a normal episode that we would have. So, but you know, maybe we should do one of these. I don't know. There's so many long form podcasts that are like 3 hours long, and I'm like, who has time for this stuff? But we'll start with this length. If you want it to be shorter, if you want it to be longer, maybe we could do some special episodes, some special interviews. We've certainly got some really fun ones lined up, Lucas. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag right yet, but we will continue our tradition of having in-depth interviews as well on the show, and I'm really excited to get rolling with those too.
So if people have feedback or content ideas, how can they send us their ideas, and how can they get in touch?
I think the best way is by sending an email to Cale, C-A-L-E, at caleclark.com. C-A-L-E, Clark with an E, C-A-L-E, Clark with an E, Cale at caleclark.com. And you guys pop us an email, give us some feedback. And you can also, of course, comment. Another thing that's really important is if you're watching on YouTube, to please click that subscribe button. I know you see this in every video, but it really does help people to discover the podcast. So subscribe, share with a friend. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a rating and review. And that, again, will help you to get the word out. Tell your friends about it on social media that we're doing the Cale Clark Show now as a podcast. And glad to have you on board. It's really exciting. It's so awesome to be, once again, back in the friendly skies with you, Lucas, you know, Top Gun style. And just chasing after it.
Looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, me too. Me too. This has been Cale Clark Show. Lucas Holt produced. I'm Cale. And here is Michaela. Take us out once again, my daughter. Go for it, Michaela.
Thank you for listening to my daddy.